Like if I hear another person in my ear about like, oh, it's a false impression. It's a false perception. I'm a smug lib who lives in like a super wealthy part of town and doesn't have to deal with shootings every single weekend, but I'm a good person. So I'm just gonna brush off people who are concerned about these issues in these parts of town by saying that they have a false perception of rising crime.
Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we're going to talk about my literal bestie, Ana Kasparian, calling out a Chicago politician for reacting to the shootings that are going on in the city of Chicago, not by trying to do anything about the shootings that are going on in the city of Chicago, but by saying that we shouldn't share information about these shootings because the problem in society isn't the people getting killed, isn't the people getting shot. The problem in society is that you're noticing it. You're paying attention to what's going on. And honestly, any way that we can obscure and obfuscate the actual issue of people getting killed in that city is beneficial for the Democratic Party in that city. Because you know what? You're racist for noticing and it's more not racist to let disproportionately black people die from shootings. Because how dare you notice? Now we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
Your support is greatly appreciated.
As shootings spike in Chicago, one local politician is basically attempting to cover it up by making it harder for local residents to get crime alerts. You know, instead of actually addressing the spike in shootings, she's just trying to hide the fact that she's not doing her job by hiding the facts from her constituents.
So first of all, I just want to point out that Ana Kasparian just stole my intro to this segment. I said in my intro, instead of doing something about this, she wants to cover it up. And then I played Anna's clip after my intro, thus making Ana copying me once again a thing. Now, if you guys believe in linear time and that this video came out before I shot my video because I'm responding to it, shut your stupid face. Anna's copying me, and I honestly will not take it. Plagiarism to the maximum. Let us all write her angry letters. But also, don't write her angry letters, because I did find out about this story from her.
So last weekend basically rivaled Memorial Day weekend in the number of shootings that occurred, and Memorial Day weekend was pretty bad. So according to the Chicago Sun-Times, 10 people were killed and at least 34 were injured in shootings citywide over the weekend, making the third weekend in a row in which more than 30 people were shot. A lot of these people who are getting shot are also incredibly young. For instance, 2 teens and a 12-year-old boy were wounded in a pair of shootings Friday night in the Douglas neighborhood. A 16-year-old boy was standing in a fast food restaurant parking lot just before 10:15 p.m. when someone opened fire, police said.
So one of the things that you'll know if you start covering crime, especially crime in different various cities, different various black neighborhoods, is that holiday weekends are absolutely disastrous. They are some of the most devastating incidents that occur in these major cities. But for a normal follow-up weekend in the summer to match Memorial Day weekend, which is notoriously bloody in the city of Chicago, is a huge problem. And remember, the reaction from the politicians, the reaction from the representatives in this particular instance is not to say, holy crap, this is a huge problem, we need to deal with it. It's to say, oh my God, I can't believe you're noticing what's going on in the city of Chicago. Please ignore this. You're racist. It's obviously definitely less racist for you to ignore the deaths and the despair and the carnage going on in these different various black communities. Ignore the fact that the people that Anna's describing are very likely to be young black males and or Hispanic males, because it would be white supremacists for you to actually care about them and acknowledge them.
And unfortunately, rather than do something about it, an alderwoman in the city named Lenny Mana Hoppenworth would basically rather just stop sharing the crime alerts. So Northside Alderman Hoppenworth, who's in the 48th ward, defended her decision to stop posting crime alerts on social media and automatically sending those alerts to all residents who sign up for her emails, even as shootings, robberies, and criminal sexual assaults in her ward skyrocket.
So right here, you have this older woman who says, you know what? We're tired of sending out these alerts, and we don't want to do so anymore unless people specifically say, I want the crime alerts in the area, because it creates misperceptions and this idea that crime is rising as crime is actually rising in her area.
She said that the alerts about violent crime will go only to those who opt in, who choose to receive them. And she said that the decision was based not only on community input. I doubt that. I've watched many members of that community say that they're upset about this, but nonetheless, but informed by research that demonstrates how over-reporting of crime leads to an inaccurate public perception about crime rates and negatively impacts our most marginalized and underserved neighbors.
So one of the things I actually appreciate from this news article that Anna is quoting from is the fact that specifically in this alderwoman's ward, crime is going up. And the reason why that is incredibly relevant is because essentially she does not want to send out crime alerts unless you specifically go out of your way to opt into it. So she's changing the way that she operates because she doesn't want you to get the perception that crime is bad in her ward, in the city of Chicago, etc. But again, that perception is informed by reality because as the numbers show, shootings, sexual assaults, again, these are serious crimes, murders, they're up in her ward. So this is what we're dealing with right here with Democrats in there, because in reality, she doesn't want you to have the perception of crime being up in your mind, not because that's not reality, but because it hurts her politically. It is a problem for her because you can't propose blocking the police from engaging in traffic stops, foot pursuits, basically stripping them of all their different various powers, at the same time that you're constantly letting people know that the area is already dangerous and those restrictions would likely make it more dangerous, not less dangerous.
And how are you going to sit there and argue that, oh, this is giving a false impression of public safety when public safety is an issue in your ward? So for instance, shootings in the 48th ward have reached a 9-year high. Robberies are up 78% over last year, and criminal sexual assaults have spiked to levels not seen in the ward since 2012. And that's based on reporting from the Chicago Sun-Times. So I don't understand how she's justifying this, because to me, it comes across as I am failing at my job. And so I would rather hide that from my constituents and not suffer the political ramifications.
Now look, I don't actually do a lot of Chicago stories unless of course they're about the Cook County District Attorney or Brandon Johnson, and honestly I've been focusing a lot more on immigration stuff rather than crime stuff related to Chicago, again, except when we're talking about Kim Foxx not prosecuting anyone for anything. But how are you going to say that you're concerned about over-reporting and that's impact on marginalized communities when clearly and obviously in your ward specifically, you're seeing not all-time highs, but near decade highs in shootings, again, the highest in 9 years, according to the Chicago Sun-Times, and of course, the highest sexual assaults that we've seen since 2012. Again, these are very serious crimes. Also, robberies up almost 80% in this particular area. So the crime alerts, to be clear, are meant to assist people, help lead to the capture of other criminals and all of that. But this woman is not interested in doing so because she doesn't want you to get the perception that is rooted in reality. And think about this. When you get these mass alerts of a sexual assault suspect that is out on the loose, maybe they come with a description, maybe you end up spotting that person might actually get caught and sexually assault fewer people. When a shooting suspect, again, similar description of that person gets put out on the wire, maybe you get a description of that person's vehicle or whatever, if it's a drive-by shooting, that could ultimately end up leading to the capture of said person. But this woman is more interested in protecting her own political career, the perception that she wants to put out there, than actually protecting the citizens. So they're basically experiencing a massive crime wave under her watch, her constituents are the victims of this crime wave, and she's thinking, how do I benefit myself? Now, of course, there could be an undergirding left-wing ideology that says, you know what? These criminals, they're only committing sexual assault to feed their starving family. They're only shooting up the place because, oh my God, they just want some bread. Isn't this really the issue that we need to deflect from and focus on the root cause? Because I don't know if you guys know this. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. The only reason people commit crimes, and this goes for all categories of crimes, is because of poverty. And honestly, unless those descriptions being put across the wire, being sent out to the citizens, tell us exactly what poverty is wearing, exactly what color her skirt is, and leads to an arrest of poverty, then they have no value in our society. Now, again, I will also point out that this is at the same time that these people are voting in the Chicago City Council to deflect resources from these very neighborhoods to illegal migrants that have entered the country defrauding the asylum system because they're the super citizens. So you have all this crime, you have it spiking dramatically. In response to that, you actually have an alert system that informs the citizens of what's going on in their particular area that could lead to the capture of shooters, robbers, sexual assaulters. But this alderwoman says, you know what? Screw that. Screw you, all you citizens of Chicago, all you idiots who voted for me, because I think it's better to pull the wool over your eyes than actually prevent you from getting shot, than actually prevent you from getting robbed, because that's how Chicago works. That's kind of how it always worked.
I don't see how you can see what's happening in Chicago as anything but a state level, governmental level, policy level failure. That's just the bottom line.
Now look, I appreciate Anna's candid nature on these particular issues. I appreciate the fact that she's even covering this particular story. But I also want to point out that I've seen Anna team up with this Woz guy, and especially compared to people like John Iadarola, he's pretty on point in these particular issues. In fact, I find a lot of agreement with this guy, even if every time they talk about a problem in Latin America, he blames the United States of America because he has that blame America first kind of foreign policy. But on these particular issues, he keeps it pretty real in terms of crime, what's going on in the communities. And he actually is one of these left-wing people who says, you know what? We should care about this. This is a big deal. And again, I appreciate that.
If you talk to anybody who's from the south side of Chicago or from the west side of Chicago, which is where all of the violence is basically concentrated, it's kind of funny hearing a north side politician making these distinctions, because again, this is somebody who doesn't actually have to live with these consequences. It makes sense when you consider that this is an elected official who these problems are failures made by elected officials.
Now, while I do praise him for actually calling out this north side person immediately going to cover it up when the south side and the west side historically in Chicago have experienced a lot more problems, he ultimately ends up going on, and you can listen to it in full in the description of this video, to blame the tearing down of certain projects as some of the cause of the crime increase, when in reality, the building up of the projects also is a huge cause of the crime increase, and tearing them down is probably good policy. In fact, a lot of the projects in the United States of America were built in this brutalist style architecture. Weirdly enough, the United States was trying to copy the Soviet Union and do this bare minimum kind of thing. And one of the things we learned through this experiment is that similar people, as in same race, same kind of economic demographics and all that, commit higher rates of crime, have higher rates of drug usage, have higher rates of taking their own life in those brutalist style buildings as compared to other places, not to mention the fact that a lot of times these projects ended up being built in these specific areas where there were homes. They weren't as good as homes as in other parts of town, but at least the people there own the homes. And in government housing, when nobody owns it, nobody takes care of it. So yes, it does lead to decay. So I actually completely disagree with his assessment right there. And in fact, if you break down the timeline of when they started taking this stuff down, I am sure you will see crime actually go down, because this tends to coincide with the 1990s when crime started to decline, when a lot of this federal housing programs were actually limited or eliminated during Clinton's welfare reform. So I think the facts are on my side in that particular issue, but again, you can hear his argument if you are so inclined. That being said, He then gets into this thing with Chicago and Fox News and the right wing, and I just want to address it because I'm kind of sick of this point too. And again, I could praise him in the beginning and praise some of his other takes while simultaneously pointing out that this is kind of stupid.
Right. And I think some of the problem with Chicago is that places like Fox News or, Breitbart and all of these other places sort of made Chicago a euphemism for black criminality and, justifiable racism. And I think people who consider themselves to be progressive or liberal or on the left, instinctively started to take like any mention of Chicago as in lockstep with our ideological enemies, which I think is a mistake.
Let's be real about this. The crime that is going on in the city of Chicago, overwhelmingly, disproportionately, is coming from black people, followed by Latino people, and those are just in the numbers. That is just the facts of the situation. But to be clear, this doesn't create the need or this basis for justifiable racism, and it's actually not why Chicago, of all places, is being highlighted above all these different other cities. Because if you wanted to talk about black criminality, go check out Memphis, go check out Baltimore, go check out more of these cities that have denser populations of black people with way higher rates of crime. In fact, the reason why I tend to not cover Chicago as much as other people, or I tend to not mention it as much as other people, is because the real reason it gets highlighted is because it's the third most populated city in the country. Thus, the raw numbers are really high, even though Chicago's not even in the top 15 most violent cities in the United States of America most years. In fact, it trails behind and pales in comparison to places like St. Louis, which actually had some strong improvement last year when the governor actually forced out the woke George Soros appointed district attorney Kim Gardner, or New Orleans or Baltimore or Memphis, that are just so much higher per capita, but because their population is significantly smaller than the city of Chicago, the raw numbers don't look as dramatic. But again, I will point out, Chicago has about a third of the population of New York City, a third of the population, yet double the raw number of homicides that we see in New York City. So what that means is that their per capita rates are 6 times higher than New York City. Chicago also has about 4 times the per capita rate of homicide as the city of Los Angeles, which is about double its population. So in reality, what Chicago being highlighted more than New Orleans, more than Memphis, more than Baltimore, which all have significantly larger percentages of their population being black, is the fact that people aren't very good at math in the United States of America. They focus a lot on raw numbers, and Chicago just happens to have crazy raw numbers. But I actually agree to a certain extent that the harping on it is kind of a disservice, because you have a lot of people in the United States of America and a lot of people on the right wing that are under the impression that Chicago is the worst city in the United States of America, and this leads to an easy defeat in an argument with anybody who understands per capita values.
Yes, there are members of the right who use the black on black trope in order to justify things like police brutality, what have you. There are nefarious intentions behind that. There's an agenda. So I understand that what it does is any mention from a progressive about this very real problem, it's going to trigger a part of your brain that's going to make you think, oh, this person's engaging in the same nefarious rhetoric or the nefarious agenda.
So I don't like the way that Anna says that a lot of people are using the black on black trope in order to justify police brutality, because A, it's not a trope, and B, that is not a generous reading of what people are saying. In fact, when I'm often confronted with the disproportionate to the population killing of black people by police, the reason I will bring up black people's level of crime, which by the way has nothing to do with black on black crime, we're just talking about their higher rates of per capita crime in certain areas, is because your likelihood to encounter the police depends on the level of crime in your particular area. And since black people tend to live amongst other black people, and there's higher rates of crime, typically, not always, but on average in black areas disproportionately, this is why we see in high concentrated areas of criminality, which again happen to be black or disproportionately Hispanic, higher police encounters, and that would explain more accurately and draw a more accurate picture of why those encounters tend to go deadly.
Consider the difference, the distinction between a progressive or someone on the left, broadly speaking, who is actually genuinely concerned about this issue due to the number of victims that arise as a result of doing absolutely nothing about it, by just ignoring it and pretending like it doesn't exist. It does exist. It is a problem that gets worse, that has been getting worse weekend by weekend, at least this year in Chicago. And there needs to be solutions. Just hiding the statistics from the general public and then gaslighting them. Like, if I hear another person in my ear about like, oh, it's a false impression, it's a false perception. I'm a smug lib who lives in like a super wealthy part of town and doesn't have to deal with shootings every single weekend, but I'm a good person. So I'm just gonna brush off people who are concerned about these issues in these parts of town by saying that they have a false perception of rising crime, even though the statistics are right there in front of our faces, right there in front of our faces. I'm not making them up. I don't know, is the Chicago Sun-Times a far-right rag, or is it a journalistic institution that, is reporting about what's happening on the ground in Chicago?
Now, that's obviously my favorite part of this clip, because Ana is 100% right. What these left-wingers often do, and I believe she's talked about this before, is they kind of sport around their beliefs about criminality, or at least their stated beliefs about criminality, as status symbols. This is why they're often referred to as luxury beliefs. And the great thing about having these luxury beliefs is that when you live far away from the criminality, when you go nowhere near these neighborhoods that have these issues, you avoid them like the plague, there are no consequences for you for holding them. But the fact of the matter is, ignoring it, denying it, being in a situation where you constantly elect and support people like Brandon Johnson or Kimberly Fox, who don't prosecute anyone for anything, who think the police arresting criminals is the problem, that negatively impacts the residents of these areas, and they happen to be overwhelmingly disproportionately minority. Now look, I do want to know what you guys think about this particular issue, about this older person deciding that they're going to not have the data be public anymore because your misperception of the crime that is actually rising dramatically in her ward is a huge problem. You should have more misperceptions and think it's going down. And I want to know what you guys think about Ana's take and this Waz guy's take. Again, all your comments down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking, I don't know why I'm so excited. This has been me talking about Chicago politicians hiding crime and Ana calling them out. Till next time.